I believe the honourable government the leader for the opposition has a point of privilege.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I am rising on a very serious matter today. As you know, I have provided notice of a question of privilege concerning the Speaker's public participation in partisan events over this past weekend. I do note that in his statement earlier today, the Speaker has indicated that he is recusing himself from this matter, which clearly touches upon him and his conduct, and that he has indicated that he will follow the practices laid down in your October 19th, 2023 ruling concerning recusals by the Speaker, found at page 17, 635 of the debates. I recognize that in some instances, complaints about the Speaker, but more particularly those concerning rulings, should proceed by way of a motion placed on notice. But I believe the current circumstances amount to such a breach of the impartiality of the chair that it warrants priority consideration by the House immediately. In Saturday morning's Globe and Mail, an article entitled "John Fraser Finishes His Time as Interim Ontario Liberal Leader as Party Elects Permanent Replacement," quote, written by Laura Stone, rather remarkably quotes the Speaker. Let me read the relevant paragraph. Quote, "He's demonstrated so much calm and conviction and resolve and determination, and he's held it all together at a very challenging time for our party." End quote. The Speaker of the House of Commons first met Mr. Fraser in 1989 while working in Ottawa. The article continues. He said, "Mr. Fraser will be remembered for experience, good judgment, and a real passion and authenticity." End quote. Who exactly is our party, Mr. Deputy Speaker? In any event, the partisan engagement didn't stop there. That afternoon, he appeared via video at the leadership election for the Ontario Liberal Party. Here is a sample of what he had to say in his 2-minute video greetings as part of the tribute to Mr. Fraser. Quote, "And boy, did we have fun. We had a lot of fun together through the Ottawa South Liberal Association, through Liberal Party politics, by helping Dalton McGuinty get elected. This was really a seminal part of my life. And when I think of the opportunities that I have now as being Speaker of the House of Commons, it's because of people like John." These remarks were introduced to the Liberal Convention as, quote, "a message from the Speaker of the House of Commons of Canada, un message du Président de la Chambre des Communes du Canada."
Wow.
He made these remarks from the Speaker's office in the West Block while dressed in his Speaker's robes. As bad as it would have been to appear at a party convention at all, it might have at least been a little bit different if he had been introduced as the member for Hull Elmer, or wore a suit or a sweater, while standing in front of a scenic backdrop in his riding. But he wasn't. He was standing there in the full non-partisan trappings of his non-partisan office, paying a partisan tribute to a partisan friend at a partisan event. Now, I recognize that Mr. Fraser tweeted yesterday that there could have been some confusion about what the Speaker's office was told about where the remarks were to be shown, but it doesn't change one iota about the fact that he was dressed in his Speaker's gowns, standing in the Speaker's office, making a partisan tribute video to be viewed somewhere. Similarly, Mr. Fraser's tweet doesn't address the Globe and Mail interview, which I just read, where he offered partisan praise for Mr. Fraser. If you do an interview with the Globe, quite frankly, you should expect to see your comments printed and posted for all to see. This conduct is simply unacceptable. It defies all long-standing traditions and expectations attached to the high office of Speaker. Late yesterday afternoon, the Speaker's office released a statement in his defense claiming, quote, "The Speaker acknowledges how this message could have been perceived," end quote. Exactly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Perception is everything. House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition explains at page 323, quote, "The Speaker embodies the power and authority of the office, strengthened by rule and precedent. He or she must at all times show, and be seen to show, the impartiality required to sustain the trust and goodwill of the House," end quote. Continuing on to the next page, we read, quote, "In order to protect the impartiality of the office, the Speaker abstains from all partisan political activity. For example, by not attending caucus meetings, does not participate in debates and votes only in the event of an equality of voices normally referred to as the casting vote of the chair. Beauchene's Parliamentary Rules and Forms, 6th edition, adds at citation 168.1, quote, "The chief characteristics attaching to the office of Speaker in the House of Commons are authority and impartiality. Yeah. Confidence in the impartiality of the Speaker is an indispensable condition of the successful working of procedure. And many conventions exist which have as their object not only to ensure the impartiality of the Speaker, but also to ensure that there is a general recognition of the Speaker's impartiality," end quote. That passage originates from the United Kingdom's Parliamentary Bible, Erskine May, and can be found virtually word for word in its 25th edition at paragraph 4.23. Beauchene's continues at citation 168.2, quote, "In order to ensure complete impartiality, the Speaker has usually relinquished all affiliation with any parliamentary party. The Speaker does not attend any party caucus, nor take part in any outside partisan political activity," end quote. As a former Speaker myself, I understand completely what this means because I lived it for 4.5 years. That's why I was absolutely flabbergasted when a photo of his participation at the Liberal Convention was first drawn to my attention. I am still, 48 hours later, deeply appalled and, frankly, deeply offended. Having served in the chair, I wholeheartedly appreciate that speakers do not arrive there through some form of immaculate conception. Speakers have all been politicians before being elected to the chair, and some of us have even gone on to further partisan service after our tenure in the chair. Bosque and Gagnon acknowledge this point at page 314, quote, "The Speaker has almost always been elected from among the members of the governing party, and although the Speaker eschews partisan political activity, he or she does not make a complete break. When running for re-election, incumbent speakers are usually careful to avoid partisan statements that might prejudice their perceived impartiality in the future." The impartiality of the Speaker is not unique to our federal parliament. Indeed, it is a common sentiment throughout the Commonwealth. In addition to the authority I already referenced from the UK, where of course the Speaker actually leaves partisan politics for the rest of his or her life, let me cite a few others for the Chair's consideration. Parliamentary Practice in New Zealand, 4th edition, also known as McGee, at page 78, advises that, quote, "The member who is elected Speaker does not thereby become a non-party member of Parliament. However, the Speaker does not play a politically partisan role and exercises restraint in the speeches or comments he or she makes outside the House. The Speaker must be prepared to assert an independence from the government to ensure that the rights of all sides of the House are protected in the course of the parliamentary process," end quote. The Indian Lok Sabha's Practice and Procedure of Parliament, 7th edition, adds at page 107, quote, "While the Speaker stands on party ticket for his election to the House, he may or may not continue to be the member of his party after his election as Speaker. Even when he does not sever connections with his party, he has refrained from attending any party meeting. However, a convention has more or less developed at the Union for the Speaker to disassociate himself from his party," end quote. The same text observes at page 306 that, quote, "Office of the Speaker, Lok Sabha, is a constitutional office and enjoys exalted status in our democratic setup. Though it is not necessary for the Speaker under the Constitution or the rules of procedure to sever his connections with the political party to which he belongs, once he is elected to the office, he, while conducting the House, nevertheless acts in totally impartial manner. Impartiality is therefore an integral attribute vis-a-vis the office of the Speaker," end quote. Turning back closer to Ottawa, Parliamentary Procedure in Quebec, 3rd edition, makes this astute point at page 132. Quote, "While the legitimacy of the chair stems primarily from the rules that govern the selection process, the impartiality of the chair is essentially determined by the attitude adopted by the President in the exercise of the functions of office. Of course, the rules of parliamentary procedure state that the President does not belong to any parliamentary group, does not participate in any of the Assembly's debates, and votes only to break a tie. But it is the manner in which the incumbent oversees the proceedings and follows those rules that determines whether actual impartiality and the appearance of impartiality are maintained." The universally expressed point here is that while the Speaker is vested with the responsibilities of being the Speaker, he is expected to check his partisanship at the door. It can be difficult, but it must be done. In a recent interview on CTV Question Period, the Speaker claimed it took, quote, all of 60 seconds to shed his decades of liberal sensibilities and political bias upon becoming Speaker. This weekend's events call that into doubt. Yesterday, the Speaker's office said he would be more, quote, diligent going forward. But the House needed his total and complete diligence since day one. This also isn't the first communications challenge where diligence would have been helpful during his brief tenure as Speaker. Recalling how a teenage blogger had noticed 10 days before this House about a procedural decision he had taken. About 35 years ago, he was one of the pages upon whom this House truly relies in order to function smoothly. Back when he was a page, had he participated at openly partisan events, he likely would have been fired. What message does this send to today's pages that the Speaker of the House, the one who is supposed to embody impartiality and devotion to the whole House, can be involved in political party conventions? This conduct, in my view, should be treated as a prima facie contempt of the House. Bosque and Gagnon explain at page 60, any conduct which offends the authority or dignity of the House, even though no breach of any specific privilege may have been committed, is referred to as a contempt of the House. Contempt may be an act or an omission. It does not have to actually obstruct or impede the House or a member. It merely has to have the tendency to produce such results. At page 81, they continue, quote, thus, the House also claims the right to punish, as a contempt, any action which, though not a breach of a specific privilege, tends to obstruct or impede the House in the performance of its functions, obstructs or impedes any member or officer of the House in the discharge of the duties, or is an offense against the authority or dignity of the House. The House of Commons enjoys very wide latitude in maintaining its dignity and authority through the exercise of its contempt power. In other words, the House may consider any misconduct to be contempt and may deal with it accordingly. This area of parliamentary law is therefore extremely fluid and most valuable for the Commons to be able to meet novel situations, end quote. There are no precedents in our House, nor are there any obvious precedents from our sister parliaments which are directly on point for the issue I raised today, possibly because no Speaker in the major Commonwealth parliaments has been so bold as to participate openly at partisan events, and certainly not doing so distinctly and visibly as the Speaker.
Wow.
But that is, as I just explained, not a barrier. There is, however, one ruling from Mr. Speaker Fraser, in front of whose chair he once stood as a page, which I think is strongly persuasive in these circumstances. In 1993, the then Deputy Speaker, André Champagne, had agreed to act as the co-chair of her party's convention. A question of privilege was raised, arguing that her decision amounted to a contempt of the House because it affected the appearance of impartiality attached to her office. Now, she was the Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker Fraser ruled on March 9, 1993, at page 16,685 of the debates, that that situation did not amount to a prima facie case of privilege because, quote, I have some difficulty in agreeing with the honourable member for Cape Breton East Richmond that the Deputy Speaker is cloaked with the same exigencies that are expected of the Speaker himself or herself. And I am deliberately careful in not extending such a responsibility by way of ex cathedra comments in this decision, end quote. This ruling, I believe, stands for the proposition that the Speaker's participation at a partisan convention would, on the other hand, have amounted to prima facie contempt in Mr. Speaker Fraser's view. He's clearly saying in that ruling that the expectations and the very high bar set upon the Speaker did not apply to the Deputy Speaker, but in making that explanation, he acknowledges and reinforces the idea that it would be wholly inappropriate for the Speaker to do what the Deputy Speaker did in that situation. Many of our rules and practices here operate on a binary basis. For example, we cannot call a colleague a liar because everyone is presumed to speak the truth. Therefore, every member has a corresponding obligation to tell the truth in the House. Similarly, the rulings of the Speaker and any comments on the partisan implications they may carry would be impermissible. That is because the House is entitled to assume the Speaker will be wholly nonpartisan while holding that office. McGee sums up the point well at page 79, quote, the Speaker's exalted position and the consequent constraints it imposes require members to treat the Speaker or any other temporary occupant of the Speaker's chair with respect and deference, end quote. If the Speaker openly engages in partisan conduct, it opens the door to public analysis of any partisan motivations underlying his rulings. And I can assure you that despite a mere 2 months in the chair, that would not be a difficult feat. Australia's House of Representatives Practice 7th edition at page 168 articulates the point well. Quote, "The Speaker must show impartiality in the chamber above all else. A Speaker should give a completely objective interpretation of standing orders and precedents and should give the same reprimand for the same offence whether the member is of the government or the opposition. Members are entitled to expect that, even though politically affiliated, the Speaker will carry out his or her functions impartially. Likewise, a Speaker is entitled to expect support from all members regardless of their party." End quote. After this weekend's events, the implied contract between the Speaker and the House, which relies on a mutual trust, has been broken. It will be very difficult for members to retain trust in a Speaker who engages in partisan activities. As Bosca and Gagnon wrote in the very first citation I offered, quote, "He or she must at all times show and be seen to show the impartiality required to sustain the trust and goodwill of the House." End quote. Should I be permitted to present my privilege motion, I will propose that the House denounce the Speaker's public participation in partisan events and accordingly ask the Procedure and House Affairs Committee to recommend an appropriate remedy for this utterly unprecedented and completely avoidable problem. I just want to address a few other points in light of the Speaker's statement earlier today. First of all, many members of Parliament find themselves in the Speaker's chair after some time demonstrating their impartiality or nonpartisanship. Often someone has served as the assistant deputy or deputy speaker and shed some of the partisanship that we often come to this place as newly elected MPs. In the case of the current Speaker, after being the former president of the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister's own parliamentary secretary, he entered into the chair with a great deal of partisanship still surrounding him. So it would be incumbent upon him to go the extra mile, go beyond what any normal speaker or a speaker elected under normal circumstances would go through. He would have to set the bar even higher for himself, knowing that he has come so quickly from hyper-partisan activities. To be president of a party is not just normal partisanship. To be the Prime Minister's own parliamentary secretary, obviously, establishes a very close relationship between the leader of the Liberal Party, the leader of the Prime Minister of Canada, and in taking on the role where he is now called upon to defend the rights and privileges of each individual MP, members will have to, it would take a conscious effort for members to set aside his recent partisanship. One of his first interventions in this House, upon being elected as Speaker, was to accuse another member of Parliament, a female member of Parliament from the NDP, of exaggerating her injuries when she was elbowed in the chest by the Prime Minister. So right there you can see an immediate reaction to defend the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Now we're being asked to accept his rulings. We're being asked to accept his rulings without any doubts about partisanship or bias. Just recently, we had a situation that was very difficult for many members to understand. The Speaker ordered the Conservative member from Miramichi not just to withdraw comments, but to actually apologize in the chamber for making an association between a political party and an odious entity abroad that is conducting horrible activities, namely Hamas. A few days later, the government House leader made a very similar accusation against Conservative MPs, and in that situation, the Speaker did not order an apology, saying that he considered the matter settled. So in that moment, we are asked to accept that is the Speaker's ruling based on precedent, based on convention, based on a thorough understanding, an unbiased understanding of the rules. And then we see him just a few days later giving remarks to the Liberal Convention. I do have a couple more points based on the Speaker's statements today. He said he didn't know where it was going to be broadcast. Well, as we pointed out, he did give that interview to the Globe. Obviously, that was going to be printed in the Globe and Mail.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I've already covered the fact that he was wearing his robes in his office. But I also point out that John Fraser's not retiring. He's just leaving his role as interim leader and going back into partisan activities.
Really?
So, yes, he's still going to be an MPP. And despite the fact that the Speaker and Mr. Fraser might be close acquaintances, might think fondly of each other, it's not like John Fraser was filling a nonpartisan role. He was playing a very partisan role in partisan politics at the provincial level in Ontario.
That's ridiculous.
So the House might decide that it would like to see any correspondence between the Speaker's office, the Speaker himself, Mr. John Fraser, the Liberal Party of Ontario, the convention organizers. We might decide collectively as the House or the Procedure and House Affairs Committee that they would like to see the correspondence to determine if that is in fact accurate. So, Mr. Speaker, I see that you are starting to give me a signal that you'd like me to wrap this up. So I just will say that because of the seriousness of this issue, I would urge the Chair to rule immediately and invite you, if necessary, to suspend the sitting, to take counsel from the clerks, and to prepare your ruling. So thank you for listening, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I do believe there are other members who would like to intervene, so I would like to reserve the right. If there are other comments made from other parties, I may seek the floor again just to offer my reflections on those commentaries.
Thank you very much for that. I know there's a number of people interested in talking about this, and what I'm going to do is I'll give the other parties an opportunity to speak to it, and then I'll go to I think